I think a lot of people started to come to this realization that our healthcare system is actually not there to keep us healthy. It's there maybe to hopefully fix us when we're really sick.
Yeah.
And if I want to stay healthy, it's my responsibility.
I'm Laurie Segall, and you're listening to Mostly Human, a tech podcast through a human lens.
Can you just let's start at the beginning. How did you get into entrepreneurship?
So, I grew up in Australia. So the funny thing is, I remember when the web first started up and, you would go to Yahoo, because I don't think Google's around at that time. And I just had no idea that these were actually companies. They just felt like websites. And the first time I came to Silicon Valley, I remember rollerblading around because that was a cool thing up and down El Camino Real. And there was Yahoo's office. And it looked like it had a few hundred people in it at the time. I'm like, oh, wow, these are real companies doing these things. So I definitely was this sort of starry-eyed Australian whose default path was to become a lawyer. But when I stepped forward in the Silicon Valley, I just thought it was so magical. All these folks were working on really interesting companies. They were sort of building the future. And the law is the opposite of that. I mean, you're litigating something that happened 10 years in the past.
Yeah.
So I sort of moved to Silicon Valley in 2003 and have been building companies ever since.
And what was the push? I mean, I thought it was interesting that you said something about you didn't want to solve problems that were in the past. You want to solve problems in the future. Was there a moment for you in Australia that you were like, yeah, I'm done here. I'm giving up you're not giving up your law degree, but you're pushing this aside. You have different ambitions. Was there a specific moment?
Well, I think it was just that, that Mary Oliver quote, what am I going to do with my one wild and precious life? And I remember sitting there and thinking, I can see the path I see what it's going to be like to be a lawyer for the next 20 or 30 years.
And what did that look
like? Financially fine, but boring. Mm-hmm. And then I did consulting for a while. I worked at McKinsey and I learned a lot there, but I also looked and could imagine what my life would be as a consultant for 20 years. And it would be financially rewarding, but boring.
Right.
And so I just decided to take the plunge rather late in life. I think I started entrepreneurship in my early 30s. And I don't know, I just have never looked back.
Yeah. And you were part of kind of the mobile era and tablets and iPads and all this kind of stuff with what you were doing. We were just talking before this about how you actually knew Sam Altman, who I interviewed a couple of weeks ago, from his early Looped days.
Yeah, so we were like the early renegades of the sort of iPhone ecosystem, the App Store.
What were you doing?
I was a co-founder of a company called Tapulous, and we saw all of these 16-year-olds hack into their iPhones to put apps on it, and we sort of recognized that this was going to be a new platform. So we bought all of these underground apps, and we ran the underground app store.
What is the underground app store?
It was this little app you would put on the phone to put other apps on the phone before there was a real app store.
Oh, wow.
And at some point, someone at AT&T told me that we were driving 25% of all the network data traffic in the US were on iPhones, because then iPhone was only on AT&T, and it was people downloading wallpapers, to change the background of their phones. So, and funnily enough, and this is what really got me excited about entrepreneurship, is in some ways there's nothing more stressful but more exciting than having a bunch of investors sort of turn you down for investment. Because I've since learned that it's sort of easy to figure out a good company for a bad company, but it's really hard to tell apart the tails of the distribution.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to tell apart a transformative company from the worst idea ever. And having been in Silicon Valley, and I remember Uber's first pitch. And I'm like, why would anyone in California, which is a driving state, ever want to get in someone else's car?
Yeah.
And we were turned down by all the investors at the time, saying, well, if you're building apps, it should be on Nokia and BlackBerry. And we said, no, this is a new platform.
Okay, so we've covered the past. Now we can get to the present. But I think it's a good way in to talk about now you see a new frontier. Back in the day, you saw kind of this app store, this kind of canvas for creativity of entrepreneurs wanting to build out apps and put them into the hands of millions of people. Now we are in a very different era. It's that era we've seen it. It's a proven model. And now there's a new frontier that we're talking about with artificial intelligence, with healthcare. There's a lot of different opportunities, a lot of noise. So talk to me about when you had the idea for Prenuvo and how it kind of came about.
Well, I think it came about, for me at least, in a pretty human way. I had, at this stage, been doing startups for 10 years. And before then I was a lawyer and a consultant, and I would say I had worked 60 to 100-hour weeks for basically 15 years. I don't say that like I necessarily think that was a bad choice. We make these decisions to invest in career because we want to have we're motivated or excited by what we're doing, or we want to have a better future or whatever it is. But I started to realize as I entered my 40s, hey, how can I make that decision a little bit more informed? How do I get more information about my health, my vitality, which I'm sort of borrowing from, to invest in building companies so that I can make a more informed choice? If I have some horrible illness and I'm not going to be around for very long, I'd rather be surfing in Hawaii than building another company. But if I'm generally okay, I can keep at it. And so I went looking for answers, and I found a radiologist who was doing an early version of what we do at Pronuva now up in Vancouver, Canada, of all places. And just through word of mouth, these Americans were flying into Canada for healthcare. And I just had such a profoundly positive experience. I learned in 1 hour more about my health than the health system had told me my entire life.
Yeah.
And I learned, in spite of my best efforts to like injure myself through my horrible lifestyle, I was like generally healthy.
Yeah.
And I went home thinking, okay, that's done. Now I can go back to building a company. But I just couldn't shake this incredible peace of mind I felt having had done it and feeling like I'd just seen the future of an alternate model for healthcare.
Yeah.
So I went back and I spent like 6 months there. Actually, I met 150 odd patients that went through the same process I went through. Some were told they had cancer.
Oh my God.
And then there were people like me were told they had some wear and tear, but nothing very serious. And regardless of whether it was good news or bad news, the overwhelming sensation I observed was just people being so grateful to have like insight into their health. And they'd get up and hug the radiologist after the exam. I'd never hugged a healthcare practitioner in my entire life.
They don't seem very huggable these days. Sometimes it can feel, the healthcare system can feel really impersonal. I think that's something a lot of people feel when they're trying to get help these days.
Well, I think because everyone's just kind of in the sick care system, everyone's just trying to survive.
Yeah.
The patients are trying to get sort of like access. The doctors are overworked. They're being forced to follow these processes that take them create more distance between them and the patient.
It's hard on both sides.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any like bad actors here.
Yeah.
But we've managed to create a bad system.
Yeah, and so your hope is that this is a part of helping the system feel a little bit more human, but technology is a big part of this, right? So can you explain exactly what the scan is? And I can walk through my own experience because I always love to beta test, so I did it. But explain exactly how it works, and what happens and what kind of data that you get from it.
Yeah, so the modality that we're screening people with is called MRI. And MRI, universally in our healthcare system, is considered to be the most advanced imaging modality. Unfortunately, that means it's also most expensive. So it's typically one of the last modalities that you are provided with. So you might go to the doctor not feeling well. First, they try and treat you without looking inside. Then they might use an ultrasound or eventually a CT and eventually an MRI.
Right. So
we took this most powerful technology, that's sort of like the last resort technology, and we sort of flipped it. And we said, what if we do primary care screening with that technology? So we ended up building clinics around the US. We put custom research grade hardware, so MRIs that can run faster than your typical MRI, which means we can acquire images with a lot higher quality in the same period of time. And built a team of now 150 radiologists and primary care providers that are interpreting these images and then sitting down with patients and going through a report that goes through every single organ in their body, what we see, what we don't see, and most importantly, what you should do about it, so that patients are empowered to be able to advocate for their own health when they go back into the health system.
Well, I mean, there's like this whole thing about like women aren't really listened to in medical care. I mean, I'm sure I'm just oversimplifying it, but there's a lot of frustration, women, minorities oftentimes going in and saying, oh, like, I think something's wrong. Like, I feel, this, and being kind of totally, now there's actually data behind it. And my hope is that this in some capacity can also like maybe help us believe women too in the healthcare system.
100%. And it's so much more prevalent than people think. I've heard hundreds of stories from women that we've imaged where didn't know that they had fibroids, or women that have had like multiple miscarriages and they didn't know they had what's called a septated uterus, and we're able to tell them this and they can get some very basic surgery and then carry a child to sort of term. I mean, it's incredible what you're able to see with these devices. And I think with women in particular, you have to convince yourself, because a lot of women feel abdominal pain not infrequently. First, you have to convince yourself that this is something you should get checked out.
Yeah.
And then you have to convince the medical system that it's worth them checking it out too. So yeah, there's a lot of hurdles.
Okay, so now we have this scan that gives you so much information. Who is this scan for? Because the price point is still high. I mean, we talk about like individual empowerment, which I hear a lot about in Silicon Valley. And I love to look at this through the lens of artificial intelligence. And I want to get to AI and how you use AI as a part of this. But my gripe with Silicon Valley sometimes is that, in Silicon Valley, AI is going to empower everyone. And oftentimes it just ends up empowering the people at the top.
Yeah.
And so I think we're in this real moment wondering like, okay, what about individual empowerment? So we can all agree that the healthcare system needs a lot of work. And what this is really helping with preventative medicine and getting in front of it. So how do you take this and create, I would say, more of a product of empowerment to more people?
Well, I think the starting point actually, and I've learned a lot as I've gone through and built the company. So I think for me, one of the things I started to realize is that the greatest source of disparity in health outcomes comes not from like a disparity of treatment, it comes from a disparity of diagnosis. So once you are diagnosed, actually we have a health system that works pretty well. The challenge is getting diagnosed. We're running a big clinical study in Massachusetts, and I talked to a lot of people in the sort of health equity space. How can we include folks in this study that we're doing? And they told me, a lot of people struggle even to go get like insurance paid services like colonoscopies and pap smears and so on. Because if you're like a single mother working 2 jobs with no childcare, I mean, it just takes a lot longer for you to get diagnosed because it takes a lot longer for you to actually get treatment. I mean, we've obviously had a lot of affluent people come and get prenatal scans, and when there's a finding, sometimes you see how quickly they march into action. So we're trying to make these scans more accessible because I actually think that it's probably the single biggest point of leverage to improve health equity is to make them obviously covered by insurance or covered by Medicare or Medicaid. And we're running these clinical trials to make that possible.
I'll get into my experience. So you guys have these like kind of clinics around, right?
Yeah.
Like and I was like a Saturday, went in, just like a lovely human there. It's like, it's hilariously just like the opposite of like the medical system. It felt very human is what I would say. And then immediately you're in, you get to watch, I think I watched like a kind of like trashy Netflix show. Yeah. So I was watching this and then like the hour goes by pretty quickly because like you're not sitting there totally, I can get claustrophobic because you're watching like, it's something that I'm very aware in a very meta way of like how this is not the way things work. And I will explain, I've had someone very near and dear to me who has been through a pretty big health scare recently. And so there's a part of me that was in there almost feeling guilty that like, this is the experience that I was experiencing. And then I will say like, as, someone who just has general anxiety, like I was like so anxious about these results, because it's like someone is mapping out your total body and you're getting a real full picture of what there is. And so I ended up getting the results. It's so funny because it said I had like a high CRP or something like that. It was like red alert. And I got this like probably a month after, and ends up like the red alert meant that I was like definitely sick while I was there. And I think like a day after there, I ended up like getting very sick. So I think it was probably picking up on a lot of that. But what was interesting is I got the results and then I spoke to the doctor probably like a week later or something. And so it was like a lot of information and it was really informative. It did give me some real specifics about like, certain things that were really helpful. It was hilarious though, I will say, because I had the doctor like send the results to my gynecologist. So I'm pretty sure my gynecologist, who's like this Upper East Side, no nonsense, like, gynecologist, OB. She's like, she calls me, she's like, what did you do? Like, what did you do? And she was really almost like annoyed at it, which is so funny because I can see that there's a tension with some of the medical community around this. My dad's a doctor, and he was like, you don't need an MRI, this or that, But I told him some of the stuff, and he was like, he really kind of opened up to it. So I feel like it's an interesting I did a terrible job of like telling the story of my own experience, but it was really empowering. I also like, it gave me some anxiety, which I think our health is, we do have anxious, like it's a scary thing looking on the inside, right?
Well, by the way, it's like, I've obviously been building businesses for some time. I've never experienced this situation where not only do you have to make a lot of effort so that people are aware that you exist.
Yeah.
Then you have to convince them that what you're doing could be relevant for their health.
Yeah.
And normally at that point you have a customer. But here we have this like interesting extra step, which is they have to actually want it and not necessarily be afraid to sort of be approaching their health in a very different way.
Yeah.
And that psychological challenge is sort of like totally new to me. It's very fascinating.
And I get it, right? There's a part of me that was like, oh, I would love to just like avoid this, but I don't want to avoid this. For me, I was like excited to be given the opportunity to get this. And it was really nerve wracking. And I think without getting into too many details, it's really near and dear to me because someone very close to me who I love very much was diagnosed with cancer recently. And the process of getting that diagnosis, I'm pretty sure could be a horror film on Netflix. Like, I don't understand like the medical system that did not work for this person I love. Like, it was very much, something was clearly wrong. She kept being sent to the emergency room. They told her she had acute colitis. All of these things that just weren't true. And no one seemed to be having any accountability for it. And so finally, because there were people around her advocating, like I used my background as like an investigative reporter to apply it. And we were able to figure out that it was cancer. And I just, had it been any longer, it could have just been terminal. And I think that's why when we started talking, it feels, I think health is the most personal thing you could take on. It's a thorny business, I imagine, but a really probably one of the most important businesses that our leaders can be looking at. But the system just didn't work for her. And I love this idea of preventative medicine and a system that works for more people. My hope is that it just can work for more people.
Well, and I can actually tie a thread through all of this.
Great, because I didn't have a question at the end of it. That was literally just a TED Talk I spoke at you, so I apologize.
So I'm going to tie a thread that's going to come all the way back to Netflix.
And I'll get back to asking questions, I promise.
So what you described is so normal that it's scary.
Right.
And I get so angry about the health system, opining about what we're doing and taking this sort of status quo like for granted, like it's a great thing. I mean, there was a study in the UK that said the average time from symptoms, we're not even talking before symptoms, which is when we're catching things, but from symptoms to cancer diagnosis is something like 9 months and involves 12 visits to doctors. Think of all of like the false negatives, like where you walked out, you went to a doctor and you had something bad going on inside your body and they said you were fine. So I think we really need to honestly investigate and evaluate the sort of status quo healthcare system. I think it's really lacking. What's happened as a consequence is that we're catching things late. Now, if we catch things late, that means that every story that you hear about healthcare is a bad story, right? It's not, you don't hear all that many, oh, everything's cool. They found this stage 1 cancer, but I took half a day off work and everything's good. It's like your neighbor who was doing the gardening one day and now has terminal cancer the next day. Yeah. Or your friend that, dropped dead of an aneurysm, or, your cousin who, played basketball all the time and you thought was healthy but had a heart attack out of the blue. I mean, these are all the stories that we hear. Mm-hmm. And when you have stories like this, if that's all you hear, why on earth wouldn't you be anxious about your health?
Yeah.
Why would you want to go look for answers?
Yeah.
So and by the way, it's so deeply conditioned that I've done 7 Prenuvo scans. I feel nervous, obviously slightly less every time, but I feel nervous before every scan.
Yeah.
So that's a really normal state. And I tell other people what I tell myself. It's not me. It's like the system that's conditioned me to think that way.
Yeah.
And feel that way. And now why do we show Netflix? Is because we want to minimize the possibility of being triggered by the reactive healthcare system. So a lot of people will say, oh, it feels like a Four Seasons or concierge. That's not the intent. The intent is actually for it not to feel like the healthcare system.
Yeah. Well, it didn't. I mean, I will say going in, especially just recently with some of my experience with the healthcare system, it did feel very different. And I think the thing that I get excited about, because I cover so much of the dark side of artificial intelligence and what happens if we're not careful. But the most interesting things that are going to happen, I think, in the near term with AI are in the medical space. I imagine AI is going to be incredibly powerful for preventative treatment and detection, or for preventative detection of disease. So I'm curious, what kind of technology are you incorporating into what you're doing? What role is artificial intelligence playing?
Yeah.
And how are you navigating kind of some of the people's feathers being a little bit ruffled by the fact that you're doing this as a way to do preventative medicine, when actually it's a little controversial in the field?
Yeah. So, well, to sort of dive first into AI, we're really using AI in 3 ways in the company. The first is to speed up a little bit the image acquisition, and there are new techniques where we can do that without loss of quality. And that enables us every year to make the scans a minute or 2 faster. And oftentimes we reinvest that minute or 2 back into adding more sequences to being diagnostic for more things. That's the first category. The second is we're researching models that can diagnose disease, starting with both disease that we really don't want to miss, like cancers and aneurysms, and diseases that require a lot of time of radiologists that have to look at thousands of images that we're capturing from every one of these studies.
Yeah.
So we obviously make use of AI like all of us do in our lives, but at the end of the day, we want you to sit down with a real person and to be able to contextualize, what it is that we're telling you, and to be able to give you an opportunity to ask questions or provide additional information that maybe we didn't get in our intake, to be able to make sure that you walk out really understanding what to do. And I think the challenge with AI is, it's so sensitive to the way you frame a question. I'll give you an example. Probably 25% of us have a condition called a hemangioma. It's kind of like an internal birthmark somewhere in our body, typically in the spine or in the liver. It's technically called a benign tumor. So 25% have a benign tumor. And when I say those words, no one hears the word benign. Everyone hears the word tumor.
Right.
And if you go to ChatGPT and say, should I be worried about a benign tumor? You're going to get a totally different answer than, if you ask, what is a benign tumor?
Right, which is probably why doctors sometimes have this reaction of like, oh, come on. Like, people are now coming, believing that they are, ChatGPT health experts. So I guess it is creating more complications too with some of the messaging around this.
Well, and it becomes really important when you're doing at the scale we are, screening people who are asymptomatic versus typically when you get an MRI, you might be very sick in hospital and have seizures or something. And the reports are read by specialists and different folks. Our reports are read at the end of the day by a consumer.
Yeah.
And, so a typical radiologist would look at your brain and actually say it's unremarkable.
Right.
Which is a good thing in radiology.
Yeah. Right, it makes sense.
But as soon as I read these reports, I tell my radiologist, hey, we can't tell people that they're unremarkable. People want to hear that they're actually rather remarkable.
No, I'm like looking at this looks like your body's under physiological stress, inflammation, not a chronic disease pattern. But this was ChatGPT when I uploaded my results, and it was like chronic stress, sleep deprivation, postpartum. I mean, it knows postpartum because I had told it I had a baby. I was like, do you think it could be postpartum? And he was like, yes, because it's affirmative and it's sycophantic. I mean, I should know all these things.
And so we sort of standardize the way we report, and we're always sort of like reevaluating and updating based on how the results are being interpreted by consumers.
Yeah, well, that's my user feedback, which is ChatGPT gave me some messed up answers. Yeah. But the doctor did make me feel great, and I feel,
There's always a tension because sometimes people complain like, well, you should send me the report first, so that I can...
So you actually have the right questions to ask. So I imagine
but then the downside is that you can also get a little bit anxious if you just plug it straight into the AI.
So what is the ultimate vision with the company? Because you started this... And it was funny because I think a lot of us learned about it because celebrities were doing it. Didn't Kim Kardashian do the... Okay, so it's like people learned about the scan because folks like Kim Kardashian are doing it. Now more and more people are doing it. It's a lot more normal. But now a lot of different companies are kind of taking up this, raising the flag on preventative health. So how do you see the ultimate vision of the company? Where do you differ from some of these others?
Well, first of all, I think as an industry, we're at this incredible inflection point for healthcare. I think consumers coming out of COVID, we were learning that people were dying of COVID that had something called a comorbidity, and oftentimes they didn't know what that was. So a comorbidity might be, cirrhosis in the liver, or might be they had cancer, but they didn't realize.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people started to sort of come to this realization that our healthcare system is actually not there to keep us healthy. It's there maybe to hopefully fix us when we're really sick.
Yeah.
And if I want to stay healthy, it's my responsibility. And it's in the same sort of category as my gym membership and eating organic food or whatever it happens to be that we're all doing as individuals. This is a really important tool. And I think we're sort of like in year 2 or year 3 of probably a 10, 20 year trend towards people really taking control. I think in 10, 20 years, everyone will be doing imaging and blood testing and a whole bunch of other biomarker testing so that we can get ahead of disease.
Yeah, it is. It does seem like such a fascinating moment for the medical field. And I also think there's so many narratives around longevity and it's like cool and all of these things. But, I know Brian Johnson's like, what doesn't he like? He like measures his erections and does all sorts of like things, which whatever, like to each their own. But I do think when the rubber hits the road, there's so many interesting things that aren't just for people in Silicon Valley. If we can kind of get this right, and if we can get this, not just for the people that can benefit more from the stuff, and I think that's my hope for this next era is that we can actually get stuff like this out in these bigger ways to more people who deserve them.
Well, for sure, between the sort of 200 things that he's doing, there's probably some things that, really work. Right. And I actually applaud these sort of biohacking entrepreneurs because they're really sort of, they're out there trying to solve for that. Yeah. I think my personal perspective as someone in the longevity space who often feels pretty inadequate next to a lot of these folks, I have a young child. I continue to work just as hard as I did before I did my first prenatal scan. Yeah. I was out last night. I had for a business dinner where I had a shock horror, like a glass of wine. I went to bed at like 1 a.m. I woke up with the intention of exercising this morning, but didn't. I'm constantly falling short. So I'm always looking for sort of what are the 2, 3, 4 interventions that are sort of like the most evidence-backed and that can sort of like get me the biggest bang for the buck. Because, I don't necessarily want to live longer. I want to have a more fulfilling life. And for me, that might be sleep, having my kid in my bed, which is 100% going to interrupt my sleep, but I'm going to get a lot of joy out of that.
Yeah.
So for me, it's about having information to live a more purposeful life. And what are some tiny but very impactful interventions that can make a big difference?
Having been now the CEO of this company that has looked inside people's bodies for the last how many years? It's
7, 8 years.
The last 7 or 8 years. What are the top couple things that you've changed about your life?
So after my first scan, I noticed I had a lot of degeneration in my cervical spine. And I don't have pain. But that was actually the first moment I realized I was degenerating. And
humbling.
Yeah. And I went and got a walking treadmill desk. And now I walk 2 or 3 hours every day. Wow. Get tons of steps in. It's obviously low impact. It's not running marathons or anything. But I've been able to stop that spinal degeneration. If anything, improve my posture. So that's one. The second is I start to really understand the power of sleep. When you see these like what are called age-related white matter lesions in the brain, which all of us have 1 or 2, there's a big, strong connection between that and sleep. So I try and get at least 7 hours of sleep, whereas I used to get 5. And just trying to eat healthier and obviously do comprehensive blood testing and imaging every year. That's my protocol. Yeah. It's less exciting than ice baths and saunas and other things, but I think it gets you sort of 95% of the impact.
Yeah. And what do you say to folks who say, well, what if you miss, right? I'm sure you've caught a lot of things, and I'm sure you've also missed on certain things. Like no company's perfect. So what happens if someone comes in and they do the scan and then something happens? What's your response to the folks who say, what if you miss? Well,
you're right. I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect test, but we're a clinical practice, so we do the same sort of things that like John Hopkins would do or a Sinai would do. We do like a RCA analysis afterwards. What happened? So can we get to the root cause of something? Why did we not call something that we should have, or why did we call something X when it was Y, and what can we learn from this, and how do we make the practice better?
Right.
And I think you only get that when you approach this space as a clinical practice enabled by technology. Whereas I think too often in the sort of like next generation health space, we have a lot of technology companies that aren't particularly clinical.
I know we have to wrap soon, so I love a good lightning round, and I thought you'd be down. So
Okay.
You said that your advice to your younger self would be to work harder to acquire skills faster, so you can take advantage later in life. What kind of skills do you wish you'd acquired earlier?
Well, ever since I became an entrepreneur, I feel like the pace of my learning really took off. But as I said, I was a late entrepreneur. I wish the moment I set foot on that Yahoo in El Camino Real in Mountain View that I had like stopped what I was doing in that exact moment and jumped into entrepreneurship a lot earlier. I love what I'm doing, and I still work really hard, but I for sure don't have the energy that I had 20 years ago.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you talk to a lot of doctors, I imagine behind the scenes, about their thoughts on the scans, people who are using it. Can you take me into like a really interesting conversation you've had about the technology, people using it?
It's really what's most interesting and what got me excited in the very early days was this sort of information asymmetry I observed. What I mean is the average doctor was pretty against whole body screening.
Yeah.
But almost every doctor that we actually convinced to get screened started to refer patients. And so we learned that as long as we educated people, we could sort of change their mindsets pretty easily. And so that's the positive. I'll give you the negative. We have been brought before medical boards for finding pancreatic cancer early in a patient, and the doctor objected to having to do something about it. We literally received a complaint because we had a finding that saved someone's life.
Wow.
And we had another one recently where we had made a call on a condition that a hospital disagreed with. And we went back and reread it a few times, and we stuck by our original finding, but they decided that they wanted to file a complaint against us. So there are people that are actively, I guess, like resisting this movement towards a health system that would be more proactive, and notably where patients would have more information about their health. And the role of the doctor, in that system is going to probably be very different to what they're used to.
You're a long-term entrepreneur. Will this be your last company?
I think so, yeah. To be honest, mainly because I still feel like our journey is very early.
Yeah.
The future, I hope one day is that, there are Prenuvos in multiple parts of a city, and you show up and you lie down and get a 10-minute scan, and maybe our AI radiologist is going to print out your report before you even walk out the door, and it's something you just condition yourself to do every 6 to 12 months.
You think that's a future that's attainable, that a lot of people could have?
100%. I think we're going to look back in 20, 30 years, and we are going to think that the way we practice healthcare today is completely barbaric.
And then the last question, why is this work personal to you?
I have family close to me that also were diagnosed late with cancer. Sometimes that was, at least in 2 people, that was a health system's fault. In one case, that was actually the person's fault. They were too scared to follow up something when they were symptomatic. What I love about Prenuvo is you sort of take all the guesswork out of it. And if you can do that, if we do that annually, it doesn't matter whether I feel healthy or not. It doesn't matter if I'm symptomatic or not. I'm going to get a complete accounting of what's going on, and hopefully make some healthcare interventions and see if I can improve my health from one year to the next, or maybe have it deteriorate or degenerate a little bit slower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good goals. Awesome. Thank you so much. Anything you want to add that we didn't get to?
No, so it's I think a really interesting space, and what's amazed me is just how interested people are.
Yeah.
And every time we talk about this space, or we are covered in, part of the reason why when Kim got a scan, we got covered so much in the media is it's just people have an insatiable appetite for really understanding more about their health right now.
I come from a family of doctors. My grandfather was a cardiologist. My dad's a doctor. He did clinical research during COVID. And so I know it's very near and dear to really be able to help people in the way that they deserve to be helped, with dignity and agency and empowerment. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Great to be here.
Awesome.